All right, everybody. I am James Kerwin. This is Larry, Dr. Nemecek. And we are doing gap filling and canon smoothing. Oh, Larry, tell us a little bit about who you are.
So some of you may have the Next Gen companion. My wife and I, Janet worked on Voyager for 5 years as his assistant script coordinator. If you know Lolita, she was the assistant to Lolita for Voyager. He was also a person working on DS9. And we're lucky enough to sell the story that became Prophecy 6 years later. And then stellar cartography, I'm very proud of how that's evolved, starting with Mike Okuda and then Jeff Mandel. And I'm currently the caretaker, and all the maps you see on Strange New now are all unified into canon and the best of all the years. And the Trek Files is our podcast from Roddenberry. I hope you're listening and you're a Trek of Files spelled with an F.
I am James Kerwin. I am a film and theater director. Here are a few of the projects I've done. I direct a lot for a blank theater company for the Stella Adler Theater. These are some of the recent films I did. Yesterday Was Alive, starring Chase Masterson and Kipling Brown from Star Trek, and Are You Our Genesis, When the Train Stops, that had John Delancey and Rekha Sharma. You can check out all these things on my website, jameskerwin.com.
Okay.
What does canon mean?
I was going to ask you, what does canon mean?
Well, there's all sorts of different issues when it comes to canon in different franchises. There's franchises like Battlestar Galactica, which did a complete reboot of its canon. There are franchises like Doctor Who that were a continuation and tried not to change canon too much.
So I delete characters' DNA, basically. Yeah.
But they, canon, long-running, here's the thing with long-running franchises. You have different showrunners over time, and things tend to get blurry.
And designers.
And different designers over time.
And corporate overlords. And all of that.
But really, you hear a lot of this, story trumps canon. And I say that's kind of a weird thing to say, because what canon really is what has occurred in the story up until this point. That's all it is when you really break it down. If you've got a book and the author kills off a character in chapter 3, and in chapter 16 the character is miraculously back with no explanation, that's a canon violation because it's a story violation. And so for a longer running franchise, obviously it's a little more difficult because you've got a lot more story to keep track of.
It's the curse of being popular. Canon to me is always basically, if it happened, then you write it down and you record like, okay, that happened. And then 6 months or 6 years later, you or someone else is going, now, had they ever done this? Or now, what was that one thing on that one deal? You have it written down. It's not an anchor. It's not a straitjacket. It's like everything else when they say, you have to know the rules. You have to know the rules of anything and follow the rules, because eventually when you want to break the rules, because you can, it's yours, you know how to do it smartly.
Absolutely.
That's all it is.
Yeah. And of course, over time, some canon issues may have crept in to the franchise that we're talking about. And so what we're going to do today is try to come up with our own kind of in-universe explanations for apparent inconsistencies.
For a few things.
For a few things, right, within the Trek franchise. Now, what we're not going to do is we're not going to talk about bona fide production errors, because those things always creep in. In the Royale, for example, they said the temperature of the planet was negative 291 Celsius, which is physically impossible because it's below absolute zero. We're not talking about costuming things like Lieutenant O'Brien, who had, he's a chief petty officer. They hadn't established that. They had the wrong thing.
More innocent people on crews, costume, whatever, makeup. Yeah, got things that we all kind of, okay.
And there are even more recent ones than that we're just absolutely not going to touch. If you watch Strange New Worlds, which you should, it's a great show. You may have noticed, there's a lot of talk about this online, that virtually every main character is wearing the wrong rank braid. But that's just a bona fide production error. So there's really no way of explaining that. And we're not even going to touch the whole assignment patch thing, because that thing has been litigated online to death, and there's a lot of angry men. And so we're not going to.
Which is amazing to me, because fandom banged on just fine for 56 years.
And another thing I want to say before we change, I don't want, one thing we're not going to do, we see this a lot online too. Strange New Worlds, because of the whole Khan thing, because Khan has now been moved in the timeline, everything is now changed, and Strange New Worlds is now an alternate timeline. It's not in the same timeline as TOS. We're not really buying that because that has not been established in canon on screen. So at this point, we are considering Strange New Worlds to be a bona fide prequel to TOS.
And we could do allow on this, but I'm totally happy for now Spock in Space Seat says the records are fragmentary. That
Exactly.
there are things, I mean, and crazier things have happened in the greater Star Trek universe. To go, what, they're 40 years off on dating a major event?
Not a big deal.
No, yep, they're bigger fish to fry.
All right, so number one. Larry, would you like to address
I'll
that?
do this one, yes. So who was in charge on Orion, in Orion culture, and when? As in, one of our early implantable images, actually the third one along, or the second one over, Sylvina portraying an Orion slave girl in 2254 when we retconned the date in. And they're subservient women, and that was the thing, and you got that idea. Then we have and now we're showing men from Enterprise, and this was Discovery, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
But then you have the Enterprise episode, made 40 years later, where we secretly learned that the women are actually controlling the men, and they're, it's a sham they're put up for the outside universe, the outside galaxy. So it goes back and forth, like, really, really? And then we get into Lower Decks, where we've come up another century, and Tendi is a one-woman, reverse the stereotype of the whole thing.
Right.
The Orion pirates and all that kind of thing, they're really all criminals. And then then we get to the 32nd century, and all bets are off because it's been a millennium since all of this. So, James, where does that leave us? What's in your mind?
I think obviously what was established in Enterprise is true. How widely that was known, who knows? And just a little side note, Larry and I both worked on a little web series called Star Trek in Tease, you may have heard of. I was writer-director, and Larry was creative consultant and played McCoy in some of our episodes. And we did an episode about Orion culture, and Larry did a nice little retcon on that.
Well, and people freaked out because the group doing the show was all in Davina, and the original series, Orion slave girl image, wasn't aware until we brought it up that Enterprise showed the secret of the culture. The women were really, and I said, well, this is crazy. So 1 century, the women there was a civil war, there was an uprising, and then so the women were running things, the men uprose, and then the men were running things, and it was a patriarchy. And then I said, what's the question is why does anybody have to be the slave to anyone? And that was the line we put in McCoy's mouth.
Right.
Yeah.
Great line.
So hopefully they things even out to what now all they're worried about is just outliving this old pirate
Stereotype.
Orion Syndicate, So
Speaking of everyone's favorite character, Dr. McCoy, 200 years after first contact, why did McCoy not know about Pon Farr?
it was just a big fake. I mean, no. The year this hit me, after not only just the movies, but we watch Amok Time. McCoy has no idea. It's a big secret. Kirk has no idea. Nobody has any idea about it. But when you stop now with First Contact and everything in Star Trek, the Federation is 100 years old at that point, and they knew each other 100 years before that. And the Vulcans really kept basic Vulcan physiology, medical. We have Vulcans serving in Starfleet on ships, and medical officers need. Maybe that is why the Intrepid was an all Vulcan crew.
Yeah, there you go.
See, but the fact that it was an odd thing, and then later on, M'Benga is brought in because he interned on a Vulcan. We go along all these questions. We go along with 79 episodes for 20 years, and then we have another generation where they didn't want to touch the original series in a lot of ways, and then they eventually did. And then we got to the years when they would embrace it, but there would be dead years in between. Now we're in a renaissance after 12 years of nothing. And fans, we sit here, much less the creators, we sit here and explain things at our heads. And when somebody comes along, I think part of what we're talking about today is we're so used to being in that comfort zone that some people go, wait, that's all. It's like, no, let's go to the tape, Bill.
Right.
Let's run the tape and see what's there. And we'll get some more of this.
Right.
But there's a difference between a violation and now we say head canon, and that's cool.
Right.
I call that canon in a vacuum by anybody, official people, book writers. There's nothing existing to address it, so come up with a good thing. But eventually, on screen, they may come up with a real canon.
And that is going to trump the whatever your head canon is. And so
But in a vacuum, go with something.
So what is the in-universe explanation for why McCoy did not know in 20?
I just say that the more we find out about, and T'Pol had Pon Farr, and Phlox knew about it, but they weren't Federation yet. And I think that's a personal bond. There was a rare thing for a Vulcan to be mixing with other species, and I think she just swore Phlox to.
It's not inconceivable that the Vulcans, who we know are extremely secretive about their secrets,
Which are between T'Pol and that. And then Sarek, we talk about Michael Burnham, much in 1989, how many remember the hoo-ha-ha about Sybok? Wait, we didn't know Spock had a stepbrother. Where is that coming from? Well, you didn't know. Sarek had 2 human wives, okay, Perrin later on. He had Sybok with a Vulcan princess before he met Amanda. This is an interesting guy. Probably why he was such a good ambassador, you know? So he takes on Michael as a foster daughter, basically. And Sarek then manipulates both of his kids that stay about the Vulcan Science Academy, and they both lit up on him. He wanted one in and one not to go so he could protect the other one, and neither one of them went for different. So Sarek's an interesting guy, but really, Sarek and Spock, I think Spock, we just had our image of Vulcans as being on this pedestal of perfect people we all wish we could be, and it was an aspiration in the 60s, 70s to be cool and rational. But the head of Vatican culture, they didn't tell you the Starfleet medical database about Pon Farr officially for 200 years.
I mean, remember, all it was established in Enterprise, the Vulcans almost just nuked themselves.
Yes.
Almost wiped themselves out. They're not necessarily this pedestal culture that I always thought they were.
And so anyway, I used to criticize Rick and Brannon for messing up the Vulcans, and Manny Coda had to come along and fix the Vulcans. There may not have been that much messed up to fix.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So speaking of people not knowing about things, wait, why does TOS Uhura not know who T'Pring is?
You know what we're talking about here?
We're talking about this. In 2259, in Strange New Worlds, T'Pring is a pretty endemic part of the show. She's been in several episodes. She spent a lot of time on the ship.
Well, and Spock makes no secret of Pike knows her, Una knows her. Who else?
Chapel knows her.
Yes, Chapel knows her.
Mm-hmm. But in 2267, Uhura says, "Who is she?" when T'Pring appears on screen.
On screen.
Right. Oh, there's a simple answer for this.
Yes. Well, there's the two-part, but just with Uhura,
yeah,
watch the Strange New World episodes. Uhura is a junior officer, one. She's not Spock's captain, equals, and interesting nurse person he's getting to know.
Right.
But outside of that little circle, no one really knows T'Pring, really. And if you watch all the scenes T'Pring is in, Uhura never crosses paths with her on camera.
That's right.
So that's been preserved.
Right.
Somebody is looking out for that to be...
Now, obviously, the Chapel thing is a little more complicated because in a up time, Chapel kind of has a gasping reaction when she sees
That's
T'Pring.
all.
But that's all. Now, obviously, the intent of the makers of TOS was that Chapel did not know who this was, but that was never actually established canonically. So,
Because of the way we knew Chapel fed for Spock.
they're pushing it, but they haven't violated it yet.
And what you can say is Chapel thought T'Pring was Lua,
Gone.
but was long gone out of Spock's life. Oh my God, she's back. And that's all we get. We hear one Chapel gasp.
Right.
And that's the only overlap. So they're okay.
Speaking of,
What
the F is up with Chapel and M'Benga in Strange New Worlds? So,
you run with it.
Okay, in 2259, we're now seeing younger Chapel and M'Benga. M'Benga is the CMO, and he is a commander by rank. This is when they did get the rank stripes right. He's wearing commander rank stripes, and on the plaque on his personal belongings, it clearly states that his service rank is full commander.
Footlocker.
Yeah, it's Footlocker. In 2268, 9 years later, we've got a Chapel with a seemingly different personality, and M'Benga, who is on the ship, but serving underneath Dr. McCoy, who is a lieutenant commander. So what happened?
So nothing else. Remember, look at those dates. And remember, first season of TOS was 2266-ish. There's 7 years in between the two series. And you go, that's only 7 years. What happens in 7 years? And if you don't believe me, look at Spock's lifespan. But I see you said different personality. I am one who would say that if we had a camera on Magel's Chapel, if we'd had a camera on her as much as Jess Brush's Chapel is, we might be surprised. I think it's a totally consistent character. Magel's Chapel pulls off a couple of sneaky things.
She does. It is a little bit of, you're right, it's a little bit of a misconception that Magel's Chapel.
Unlike all of these legacy characters, I think something big is going to happen to all these overlapping lives.
Right.
The Spock, for sure, is not going to be the Spock that we see. I mean, he grows up, but I think he's going to have some life moments and even traumas that will make him... And I think the same is going to happen to Chapel and M'Benga.
Yeah, and so that really...
Either living the service and coming back.
The in-universe explanation to this one is stay tuned. Strange New Worlds knows what they're doing. They're doing a pretty good job of sticking with canon as best they can. within the constructs of the show they developed. And we'll see what happens with these guys.
And the thing with Mbenga being the chief medical officer, there's tons of time. But even before that, before McCoy was the CMO, Mark Piper was Kirk's chief medical officer. He may have been for a year and he retired. He looks like he's barely getting around.
Yeah.
When he's in where no man has gone before. But there's a chief medical officer between McCoy and Mbenga.
We have also seen characters like Tuvok, for example, leave Starfleet and then rejoin Starfleet at a lower rank. So that all sorts of reasons why this could happen. So stay tuned. So here's an interesting question that people threw up a lot about Discovery. Has there ever been a mutiny in Starfleet? In 2256, Michael Burnham is tried and sentenced for attempted mutiny. That is not some of the information that is covered up as top secret when the Discovery goes into the future. Everyone in Starfleet seems to know that Burnham was a mutineer. But in 2268, not that many years later, Spock says in Tholian Web, there is absolutely no record of a Starfleet mutiny.
I believe this was a one-off. I don't think anybody joined Michael's.
Exactly.
That's the point.
An attempted mutiny is not a mutiny. A mutineer does not a mutiny make. If you watch the Discovery, she attempted a mutiny. She was clearly not successful.
It lasted all of 10 seconds.
Exactly. Yeah. So the idea Spock's talking about an entire crew. If you remember the context of him saying that, he's talking about an entire crew mutinying against their captain. Well, clearly that has never happened.
Bounty situation. Right. Yeah. Mutiny on the Defiant. No.
Yeah. Speaking of Discovery,
and many people have over the last year.
During the Klingon Federation War of 2256-2257, did Klingons have hair?
Yeah, we covered over the first season of Discovery.
The first season of Discovery. Now, the makers of Discovery have gone on record as saying that they had depicted all the Klingons as being bald during that period.
You may have heard there was a little frou-frou over this.
And they said, well, in honor of Kales, who cut off his hair and forged it into the first bat'leth in Klingon ancient history, the Klingons had shaved all of their heads during times of conflict and war and strife and so forth. And that was the explanation, right? So during 2256, 2257, the Klingons did not have hair. And in fact, in the second season episode, Point of Light, Burnham actually says, I heard post-war the Klingons are growing their hair again, which implies that they did, in fact, shave their heads. Now, if you've seen Strange New Worlds, you will know there are some flashbacks to the Discovery Season 1 Klingon War. And, well, yeah, there you go.
They've got Klingons, they've got hair. They've got hair.
Yeah.
So this is an easy one. This is what I call texture, not trivia. When people watch a show and go, oh, they got that wrong. Oh, no. I mean, everything we're talking about here is like, rather than condemning showmen, occasionally, yeah, they'll get the O'Brien pips wrong.
Yeah.
Those things happen. That's a boner. But 90% of the time, 95% of the time, it's something you can look at and say, rather than get up and scream and clutch your pearls and say, that's wrong, it's wrong. You can say, oh, well, it happened. It's on one thing. It's on film. It's on. Are you going to start discounting parts of something? Many people do, and if that's the way you are able to sleep at night, then okay. But here's maybe a little bit of a head. There's some of you some sleep.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the exception that proves the rule. Maybe we just. I mean, one thing that happened when you're collecting new people when a Star Trek restarts and you have new people involved and you have people wanting to show their stuff. And may not look at canon and all the continuity the way, or they may be big on concept, like Michael Burnham is going to slot in right here and it's fine. The fact is, maybe these guys were not the entire Klingon Empire, which is something that we go to the minute they back off of this. And by Loan's second season time, they took pains to show a mix of Klingons. And in Strange New Rare, and we started talking about species diversity. And look, if you want to get off on this, we've had these bicotellites suddenly with the tusks we ever had, and now we see all of them. So it's actually
Tellurites with different numbers of fingers.
And as my friend Commodore would tell you, with the science panels and everything, that's really more realistic. And having it, we started having. Now we would call them black Vulcans instead of just the and Asian Vulcans. I mean, there's a species diversity.
Yeah, the idea that every single Klingon all across the entire Beta Quadrant shave their head is rather ridiculous.
A huge sprawling empire.
Yeah.
And as we said last night in trivia, they're not all warriors. Anyway. Sorry.
Okay,
that's ticked off. Okay,
all right. Next,
the question
This is an interesting one, though. This is an interesting one because it goes to what you were saying, the head canon that people...
This is interesting because he's simply invoking all the ship nerds.
Right, right. So, ship classes are the Farragut and the Peregrine. We're talking about the 2250s, 2260s ships, not later ones. Okay, so the Enterprise was originally called Starship class by the producers, as you probably know, but it's on the plaque. Ultimately, it's on the plaque. Ultimately, in the franchise, it became referred to as Constitution class. But the book, The Making of Star Trek, included a list of ships in the Enterprise's class, and it was partially based on a memo by D.C. Fontana. And that list included the Farragut as being of the same class as the Enterprise.
And that's the list that's on the decal sheet for the AMD monitor.
Yeah, and that became widely accepted as, even though a book is not canon and a memo is not canon, it became widely accepted as canon. But this is a little side note, just a trivia point. The first on-screen reference to the Enterprise being a Constitution-class ship was in the episode The Trouble with Tribbles, when Scotty is looking at his display screen with the phaser.
But you see this for a nanosecond.
Yeah.
That's different than the crudograms later on that you see for a nanosecond.
Right. So, okay, flash forward to Strange New Worlds, and we see the Farragut, the NCC 1647, and it is clearly not a Constitution-class ship. So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and it was a little confusing because it was an alternate. It was almost like a Q episode that's all going to go away.
But now we've
seen it, and we have now since seen it
in the prime timeline, and it is indeed not a Constitution-class ship. And there were people who were up in arms about that. But again, it was never established as being a Constitution.
And this is what I'm talking about
in canon.
This is what I'm talking about. We've carried that around for 40 years. It's almost like, well, shouldn't that have just been canonized by now? I've heard from my sources that this was a huge internal debate in the writers' room, that a lot of the writers said, we can't go against Dorothy's list that was in the tech manual from French, that was on the decal sheet, that 50 years of fandom has grown up with it being another Constitution class.
Yeah.
And when they talk about Kirk being a lieutenant on the Farragut, it was the Farragut, right? Yes. And all of them, the encounter with the vampire cloud and all of that, we've always thought that was another Connie, another Constitution class. But you're right. Remember where was it on film? It's almost like those production memos, we just assumed they're all...
Right. And if you go back and you look at production memos that Fontana wrote, that Justman wrote, you will see an enormous amount of them were not implemented. They are suggestions. They are not...
Oh, the show went this direction. They said, oh, let's do this instead. But they didn't get a chance, or it never...
Right. That just didn't happen. Another one that people have asked about...
Uniform patches.
Is the Peregrine. Now, the Peregrine looks a lot like the Enterprise in Strange New Worlds, but they went to great pains to say it is not, in fact, a Constitution-class ship. It is very similar, but not identical. It is called Sombra class. It has different engines, and some of the decals, or whatever you would call them, the paint job on the outside is different. The window sizes is different. They did change some things on the model.
The pennant and the, registry marks and all of that.
Yeah. Picard introduces a late 2260s style Constitution-class ship that has been previously unseen and unheard of, called the New Jersey, which, of course, in real life was called that because that's where Terry is from.
That's where he's from, and hit the NCC number is supposed to... It's supposed to, yeah. So that, rank has... That's LHIP. Rank has its privileges if you're the showrunner. But it's still... But here's the thing. Terry and his Conrad in Arms, Del Blas, the production designer, the cool thing about them being fanboys to begin with, is that they knew they were doing this, and it never came up like in the show. It wasn't a show point. But if you're following their socials, and you should be, their Instagrams and Facebooks and all that, they were like ready-made in case somebody raised the question. Or they even put it out before anybody quit. Now, I know a lot of you are going to talk about, we know that he was born in New Jersey, he was born... But they said, and they've come up, they retconned it before the fans could because they were fans themselves. And Terry's and those adopted thing is, this was one of the last of the constitutions that would have been after, like the Defiant. The Defiant is not on Dorothy's memo, right?
Right.
And it wasn't even it wasn't on the decal sheet, or it wasn't in French.
That it was just in TOS as a Constitution class ship.
Yeah. And then again in Enterprise as a Constitution. So that kind of thing this was a late production run ship, just as they were starting to refit the older ones, like Enterprise and Motion Picture. Right.
There you go.
There we go. What's cool about that is it was the showrunner who retconned it for us.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a fan. It was a fan debate for 5 seconds.
Right.
And then they went,
And again, not technically a canon violation. So
right. But I mean, they're like, we've got the point where if you're lucky, you've got a production designer and a showrunner. They go, ha ha ha. No. I'm ahead of you.
right.
We got this.
Right.
We got this.
Okay, so switching topics to what could be a much longer topic. We're going to try to keep it shorter. How does money work in Star Trek? Now, this is a very, very, very confusing thing, in part because behind the scenes, they had not always decided on how it worked, and things had to be retconned and things like that. Yeah. And was Raffi poor in season 1 of Picard? And we've even seen some cultures that have their own currencies, like Ferengi have gold. Almost everybody met the Federation. Yeah. So many different cultures have currencies, but there is no money in the Federation. This was established in Star Trek 4 very clearly in dialogue. It was established in Deep Space Nine very clearly when Jake says, I'm a human, I don't have money. It's very clearly established that there's no money in the Federation, except when there is. Because in the Trouble with Tribbles, they're buying triples for credits, right? And in the Crusher says when she's at the Farpoint station, she takes the fabric. She says, "Oh, charge this to my ship account." So, what's the explanation for this?
Well, these are clearly times when Federation people, and these are different centuries, right? These are 100 years apart, right here. But it's Federation people interacting with non-Federation people.
Exactly.
And the microcosm for all that is Quark's bar.
Right.
The most crossroadsy place that we've ever seen.
Right. And Ron Moore has discussed this at length. Many of the showrunners have discussed it at length. But really, the best explanation for this is that Federation citizens don't have to have money. They can get by without it because the Federation is a currency-less society. But they can choose. They can choose to accumulate credits for trading with non-Federation cultures, and we've seen this time and time again.
And the underpinning of all this is replication technology, because suddenly an atom, a gold and lead are just atoms.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're all just chemical formulas. They're all just equations. And when you've got that easy access to replication, there is no. That's why they came up with Great Press Latinum on DS9, and then it took all those years to get for Rumorns from Morn. They grab fans and the showrunners of Ira, Ron, all of them. Like, okay, so why is Go Press Latinum so special when we have replication technology?
Can't be replicated.
And it can't be replicated. That whole elaborate excuse about it's suspended in liquid and
Inside the bar, right?
It's the currency equivalent of the smooth-head Klingons. It took all that time to come up with something that would fit.
And here's the thing. People point to TOS and they say, look, Kirk frequently refers to money. He says the Federations, the Starfleet spend a lot of money on your training and things like that. These are colloquialisms. They're colloquialisms, and we in fact know this because there is a DS9 episode in which Jake talks about, I sold my first book. And I think, what is it? Somebody, Quark says, what do you mean sold? And he's like, well, it's just an expression that we use. It's a colloquialism. He didn't get any money for his book because they don't, so thank you, Ira, Wolfie, Ron. They smoothed it for us, and they smoothed it well. Right?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
so now I think that's pretty much it for the canon questions. We're going to get into some other things, little trivia items that people often ask about and are curious about, and there are a lot of misunderstandings about. And one of my favorite ones is, what is the deal with fleet captains and commodores? Because we see these things referred to all the time in Star Trek, and they're very, very, very poorly defined. So let's talk about the actual Navy, which is what Starfleet is based on.
In the real world.
In the real world, they're not real things.
Badly defined. So very much.
Yeah. So So in the actual Navy, these are
U.S. Navy.
In the U.S. Navy, which Starfleet was based on.
Yes.
These are the naval officer ranks, and you can see them from O1 all the way to O11. Captain is the highest rank before the flag officers. Flag officers are admirals. They're 1 star, which is also called lower rear, 2 star, which is called rear, 3 star, which is called vice admiral, 4 star admiral, and 5 star fleet admiral. Okay, so that's it. The next rank above 06, the next rank above captain, is a 1 star admiral. You'll notice that Commodore and fleet captain are not on this list because those are not official naval officer ranks. Historically, at times they have been, but at the time TOS was made, those ranks were not in existence anymore. Okay, so what do they mean? because people still use those terms. So what do they mean in the real Navy? Okay, so let's start with fleet captain. Fleet captain is a title given to an officer of either commander or captain rank who is in a position of seniority in the fleet, such as a chief of staff. They don't have to be a chief of staff. They usually are. But that's what the position means. It is a title. It is not a rank. Again, a commander could technically be a fleet captain. It's just a title. It's a nice title. And if
Like how chief medical officer.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So, in Star Trek, we've seen a couple of different fleet captains. We've seen Fleet Captain Garth Vizar, and we have seen Fleet Captain Pike, who is referred to as a fleet captain in the Menagerie. And we saw him being promoted to fleet captain in a recent episode of Strange New Worlds. And I loved this because if you remember in the Menagerie, when they're talking to Kirk about Pike's injury, Kirk says, I met him when he was promoted to fleet captain. Well, in Strange New Worlds, where Kirk comes on board from the Farragut and meets Pike for the first time, he says, congratulations on your promotion to fleet captain, because earlier in that episode, he had been promoted. So this is another example of how the makers of Strange New Worlds are doing their best to stick to canon.
Because most of the time, you have situations
I just
like
love
this.
the fact that they singled out one little individual line from the Menagerie, and they made this entire scene around it. I mean, it's great. So the other part of that question, back to this, here's the official naval officer ranks. What's a Commodore? Well, we hear Commodores referred to from time to time. We hear it a lot in TOS. They're briefly referred to a couple times in TNG, and then they're referred to quite a bit in Picard. But as you can see, in the real Navy, there is no such actual rank as Commodore. In the real Navy, a Commodore is a title given to an officer of captain rank who is made an honorary flag officer. In other words, they are treated like an admiral, but instead of being brought back to headquarters like admirals are, they are usually kept in the field in command of a base or a ship or a squadron of ships. That's what a Commodore is in the actual Navy. Again, it is a title. It is not a rank, but a regular 06 captain who is not a Commodore always salutes and addresses a Commodore as Commodore. Only on very formal documentation are they ever referred to by their 06 rank captain. You always refer to them as Commodore, and they get to all the accoutrements of an 07. So we've seen some Commodores in Star Trek, and here's a few examples. In the original series, we saw several. In Picard, we saw O, who was actually an undercover, right? Yeah, and then Geordi in the final season of Picard was also a Commodore. And a difference between Starfleet and the actual Navy. In the actual Navy, although Commodores wear captain rank, but they also have an additional pennant. In Star Trek, Commodores wear the 07 rank. So it's a little unclear as to whether or not Commodore means something different in Star Trek.
What you're saying is they're wearing the lower admiral.
They wear the lower admiral rank instead of the captain rank. So it's a little unclear. It's
and Geordi both.
It is unclear in Star Trek exactly.
Well, you know, they're like 200 years in the future, James. They could be doing whatever they want to do.
But this brings us to trivia time.
Okay.
What were the 3-division uniform colors in the early 23rd century prior to 2239?
We're talking about as soon on the only ship we've got at that time.
We saw a ship from 2230 with these 3 colors.
From the 1930s. Okay, let's say this. We're talking about as seen on the Kelvin, which was prime timeline at the very beginning of Star Trek 9.
Of Star Trek 09, the Kelvin was in the prime timeline. We see it cross into the Kelvin timeline. What were their 3 uniform colors? It's the only time we saw the uniform colors from 2230. Blue, gray, and olive. Yeah, okay. So you can find me at jameskerwin.com. I work with a really cool nonprofit called Halicon, which is a cinematic arts nonprofit foundation dedicated to bringing scientific and intellectual themes into films. You can find out all that information at jameskerwin.com.
And everything of mine is at LarryNemecek.com. There's even the QR code. All the stuff is happening. Thank you guys. Thank you guys so much, and thanks for supporting.